as we start this module off with budget and financial planning, I know this is one of the scarier moments and times for organizations and people I work with. I think we do a really good job talking through the impact, having a broad sense on what the resources we need are. But when you start breaking that down, I can see people's eyes roll to the back of their head. So we're going to start off nice and slow and think about just talking through some of the detail that you can add to budgets, where we've seen budgets that are sparse versus more detail, and just thinking through how we can add a little bit of that narrative component, add a little bit of that justification to budgets, just so a funder isn't strictly looking at numbers, but understands the why behind each of the line items that you have. So, Asia, are you really comfortable jumping in Excel, or are you kind of like, let me just get the snapshot and move on?
No, that's a good question. No, I'm really eager to jump into Excel because I think overall, just part of the grant writing process, budgeting reminds me of the logic model, and it's about organization, it's about clarity, and it's also about maximizing the dollar that you have while also finding the gaps in the room for the funder to be able to fill so that you can, again, maximize the impact, because that's the point. And so I say all that to say, perfect example that you just mentioned there with the budget justification. It's the why was most important, because it also, as you're internally doing your budgets with your project teams at your nonprofit, it's super important to understand some of those cost-effective strategies, because a funder loves to see ways that you have already been responsible with funding that you already have. And also that contingency component, that if you don't get the optimal funding that you want, what's the backup plan? And I think there is room to showcase that within a budget.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that's where knowing the unit costs on things, whether it's like the cost per meal, cost per food package, I think that shows the funder that you've really done your homework. And then, if you're building out a budget for X dollars broken down by a Y dollar unit cost, you can show how the funder concretely, how you scale up or scale back, if they give you the full amount, or if, maybe they cut it back by 50%. And I think that's powerful to show the impact, that you know what you're doing, and putting a little bit of the onus on the funder for you. If you have these lofty goals and projections, like, they need to step up to help you achieve those goals.
Exactly, because it also is about what we know and what we've learned from the basics, right? You get what you pay for. And the reality is, when that budget justification component comes in, there is an opportunity that I have seen successfully, I've utilized successfully, to actually call by name what type of, entity or what type of individual we want to use. And this is why their rate is the way it is. It's because they produce results. And I think that speaks very strongly in terms of communication to the funder when they're looking through your pro forma, that combination of the expenses versus the current funds that you currently have. And so, just to double down on that point, it's also important for you internally as nonprofits to that helps with the overwhelm, right? It allows you and your project team to understand, this is why we're going after these numbers, and this is why it's important for us to go after these types of manufacturers, suppliers, or individuals, because your community deserves that, right? They deserve the best. And I also think we don't want to shy away from the matching fund component, right? I've seen budgets come across my table where I can identify, well, why do we have to do it there? Why can't we wait to do it in another cycle? And when you pose those certain questions to your project team, specifically, at your nonprofit, it allows for you all to really understand your full scope of, do we have to spend dollars on that this year? Or do we have to spend it right now for this grant? Maybe we can ask another grant for that. Maybe we can partner with someone else. And so that alleviates the overwhelm, just like when we opened up the conversation. It's like, no one really wants to talk about budgets because it can be overwhelming, but it also presents an opportunity for you to really quantify where the money's important.
Yeah, I think that's a great external benefit, where if you do the homework and you know your budget backwards and forwards, you can plan in terms of like timelines, maybe phasing out certain staff coming on board, programmatic expansions, and that level of expertise is going to shine through in your applications, where you know your stuff backwards and forwards. If you do need to have a conversation with a funder, if they can't give you the full amount you asked for, you can be strategic on what you cut back right then and there, because you've already done the work. I do think you bring up a really great point, though, about that justification when it comes to like personnel or contractors. I think talking about those bona fides for whether it's current staff or the kind of staff that you want to bring on board for a certain expansion, being aware of the cost of living expenses, being able to make that case, trying to get away from that scarcity mindset where people are expected to have 2 or 3 jobs at once for, an AmeriCorps salary. I think you want to be able to justify that to funders because, these funders obviously have some means to give to your agency, and you want to make the case that, we can't pay people in granola and hugs. We need to make sure that we pay them a living wage. We're walking the walk where, we advocate for our clients, but we also advocate for our staff as well. And doing a little bit of that homework means you're more competitive with the salary ranges that you're offering for folks to come on board, and you can effectively communicate that to funders and show why you have the best personnel possible implementing these programs.
Excellent point, and that's why it's so important for nonprofits to take in mind what type of funder are you looking to present this budget in front of, because as we had mentioned earlier in this course, as related to federal grant applications, those have stronger and stricter regulatory practices in the state versus city or even a private foundation. I've seen in my line of work, private foundations can be flexible. They'll see a budget and they're like, it's a little lot, but they won't completely nix it. You may get a phone call for some feedback for wiggle room. Can we cut? Can we move some things? And so be very strategic when you are putting together your budget. If you look at it with your internal team and you're like, this is really big, that may be an indicator to better help you define what type of funder the budget is an appropriate fit for. And so take that into consideration, take that in mind, and while also continuing to reflect and consider the budgets that you've already submitted as part of your grant applications, what was that feedback? Right? Or the lack thereof, and how can you leverage that for the next application, as well as how detailed have your budgets been? Was your justification full, as Anthony had mentioned earlier, or did it lack a little bit where you can optimize it a little bit more for the next one? And then finally, reflect and continue to share resources with one another in terms of where do you see the most room for improvement in the line item clarity, specifically meaning which aspects of your program that you do have to fund, whether that be personnel, whether that be supplies. Where is there room to make it a little bit more specific so that you're really breaking down that number where it makes sense to a funder? Yeah, I need to give X amount of dollars to that because this organization has broken it down the way that it needs to be. Alrighty, so continue to resource share while also maintaining that overwhelm as it relates to talking money, because it can be overwhelming, but it also provides an opportunity for organization, clarity, and also accuracy, because the communities deserve it and you also deserve the opportunity to put the funding dollars where they matter. So we look forward to sharing some more and talking some more through exactly how to implement this within the grant applications you go after.